my question is about changing the group mind, how that happens. And I'm asking, the question actually occurred to me because I'm reading Tyranny of Words, which Jacques Fresco talks about. And there's a chapter in there about primitive people and how they were like fighting amongst each other because of breakdowns in semantics. And so it seems like it's not just the economic structure or resource-based economy that needs to change, but there needs to be an awareness about the trappings of semantics. And so I'm just wondering if this movement addresses that, and if that's something that's kind of part of the plan to have education about that.
I can say for myself that I enjoyed that book immensely, and I agree with you, and it's always on my mind. Everything I write and I publish, everything that went into the lecture tonight, I thought about that. What word am I going to use that could be interpreted 100 different ways? Which means there are going to be 100 different interpretations of what I just said. So I'm not communicating very effectively. Outside of being aware of that and trying to use the most concise language I can when I want to express a point, I don't know, I guess that's, I feel like it's more of a personal communication issue. And I know that in the materials that are published, like the orientation guide, and the articles that are put out on the United States chapter site, there's time and thought put into, what do we want to say? Where's the physical referent behind what we're talking about? And actually, that brings up a good point, that there is a physical referent, the environment that we live in. Actual, knowable, measurable attributes to our ecology. How many trees there are, how much air there is, how many resources there are on the planet. Starting from that physical referent, rather than starting from a philosophy, from like a political philosophy or a religious point of view. Does that make sense?
It does. It makes sense, but it doesn't really, that's not exactly what I was asking.
I think
go ahead.
I would be able to help. As far as how the Zeitgeist movement addresses the issue of semantics and the problem with the communication, I think the first thing that's good about what we're advocating in that respect is that we're reducing things to the most fundamental level that we could possibly find, and the root causes, and defining that physical referent as we go based on the lowest common denominator, which has the highest quality of referent. In other words, if you were to say, what is an economy, you could have 100 economists tell you all sorts of crazy things about it, using all sorts of made-up terminology that they've come out with, all sorts of invented, tons of invented rhetoric that goes along with that. But an economy really is a management of resources. So you can reduce it simply to that thing. The Greek definition is management of a household, to be accurate. Anyway, we inherently, since we were supporting such a foundational view, such a core, anything that interferes with rhetorically that interferes with this approach usually comes from people projecting ideas in a semantic way that they've picked up in the culture, and we spend most of our time, at least I do, breaking down people's language and communication. So inherently, even though we don't talk about it, inherently the movement's points are breaking down the semantic nonsense because we're going straight down to the root source of whatever we can find. And I'm trying to think of a better example for you, but if you really think about what the approach is, and you think about what a word is, and as Stuart Chase and what Jacques always talked about, or continues to talk about, it's the need for a physical referent for everything that you say. And that is inherent to the communication of the Zeitgeist movement. I spend, as Jason pointed out, so much time trying. I grew up in a very verbose, romantic environment. I used to do lots of writing and stuff that was of a very verbose and whatever nonsensical manner. And I have to call myself like crazy to stop the nonsense that can come out of my mouth. And I mean that because it's so easy to be fluffy in language. Like, people love to ask me, and my favorite semantic issue is, what do you think about spirituality? What does that word mean? And usually 9 out of 10 times they can't even give a standard definition. They can't give any definition. They will just pick more semantic nonsense fluff words to define, and then you end up in the circular reasoning of these relationships that don't hold any ground. For example, and we talk about functional spirituality as a term that we've used in the orientation guide. What does it mean for a spiritual practice to be applicable? What is it based on? And by that very collaring, by asking that question, you're immediately putting somebody into a position to question what they mean by that word. You see what I mean? So I think, even though we don't address it, but it's the kind of thing that's so hard to talk about, and I think Stuart Chase did one of the best jobs out there. But how do we approach changing language? I mean, we still say the sun rises and the sun sets. I mean, it's pretty obvious on a certain level, but there's so much rhetoric so deep into the language that I don't personally know how to approach it, except making sure every time you're in conversation with somebody and they bring up any word you don't know, immediately stop them and ask them what that word's supposed to mean. Because I would say a great majority of people speak with a floating referent. They speak with what sounds right to them, and if they don't, those people, I hate to say it, don't really know what they're saying. They're just repeating themselves. They speak in symbols. All words are symbols. I don't mean to sound harsh, but all words are symbols, but they speak in a symbolic contour that just feels right because of their social condition, and they're not actually referencing anything with their speech pattern. So I'll just summarize this by saying that every word that we try to use, or I try to use, every concept before the Zeitgeist movement tries to make sure that everything can be defined down to the lowest possible square we can find, meaning it has a physical referent. So intrinsically in our communication, because of what the subject matter is, we are having an effect on language, because we can't even begin to communicate with most people until they begin to understand the reference that we come up with to begin with. You see what I mean? It's built into the way that we're describing this and to what the movement actually represents, which is understanding what's true, understanding what's right, meaning what's responsible, what works for a particular purpose, meaning the purpose of us living and being sustainable. You see how the referent and logic can keep going, and it eventually just gets tinier and tinier where no one can question it. That's why I have absolutely no, at the fundamental level, I don't know how anybody can debate the things that we talk about. Anybody, at any level, if they want to live, if they're interested in living. Now, if they don't want to live, then that's different. But that's a different goal. And I think most people want to live, and they want to live well. And from there, you have this ground-up reasoning. Seriously, though, it's that simple. And our language needs to reflect that. And hopefully, it will eventually change into something more scientific and accurate. Instead of politics, which is based entirely on moral relativism and semantics and cultural exploitation, the scientific, mathematical language where a blueprint can be created and handed off to someone who, in a completely different continent, they can understand it because it's a nearly universal language. This is the hope, where all of our language will eventually be this technical. So we evolve into a technical language, and I know poets and romantics don't like stuff like that. I hear a lot of criticism at that level, but we're not talking about poetry. We're talking about actually designing our reasoning correctly so we know how to correctly relate to the physical world around us, so we can actually utilize it properly, so we can survive, which we hope is our goal. So yes.
And as far as coming together, changing the group mind, I think we are coming together. It's just a semantic issue, as Peter just went over. We all do share common values as what supports us, what relates to our well-being, and we all share common values when you break it down, like Peter just kind of went through. So I think we are already there. It's just we need to kind of get our semantics right and come together under one unified common direction. So.
Thank you for the question, and we'll have another question here in a moment, but you mentioned Stuart Chase's book, Tyranny of Words, and have you read Korzybski's book, Science and Sanity?
Yeah.
Written, I think, in 1933, addressing also language. Yeah, try that one on.
Definitely.
Okay, next question.
Yeah, I just want to add, when you're talking to people, or whether it's, on a communal level or just an individual level, the barometer that I use is, is this person coming from a place of contribution? Are they actually, is the language they're using attempting to limit me? I'll just leave it at that. Okay. I love the movement. I'm all full support. There's a little gray area for me, which is, okay, so I know the goal now is to attain critical mass, all for it. So let's just imagine for a minute that we have. Okay, so we've attained critical mass. What is the strategy that the Zeitgeist movement has designed? Okay, so enough of us have woken up. Now, what are we going to do tomorrow?
The critical mass really is the value shift. It's not like there's some army that's generated, you know what I mean? This is, what we're doing is really breeding a culture that can be sustainable. It's not just like some imposition group, but I understand what you're saying. I'll get to that in a second, but it's very important that you understand, and we all understand what this critical mass is. It's not a bunch of people standing in line ready to do something against this or that. It's really the new culture. This is really what the Zeitgeist movement at its very core, again, as I mentioned in the presentation, it's really about creating a sustainable culture. And when people come into the movement, they're not just coming into an activist community, they're coming into a value shift. They're learning how to live differently and wondering why society isn't supporting these values which they identify as sustainable and responsible. So that's one side of it. The other side of it, as far as tangible actions, I think we're going to get to a point, the Zeitgeist movement or not, where the civil unrest and the anger, which we're already hitting an anger phase to a certain degree on this planet, the outrage of what's happening with the tremendous division of classes still, the wealth gaps continuing. We have, I won't even go on the list because I think everyone's more or less aware of the social unrest and problems, and you know, we're going to have unemployment crises continue, we're going to have energy crises, we're going to have this continual debt crisis with limit possibility. All of this stuff will breed a reaction of some kind. And that's not going to be pretty for the most part, I think, because no one really knows what the solution is. For the Zeitgeist movement, and by the way, just to finish that point, I encourage everyone not to have any kind of aggressive mentality when it comes to these things, even though I know people get upset. You can't. It's not going to resolve anything. You have to stop and realize that supporting this system is the problem. So rather than wanting jobs, and all these people clamoring for jobs, what they should be wanting is a revolution of the system so that they don't have to have those jobs, because they're not going to come back anyway. So if they really thought about it and understood what's happening, that's the way they would think. Social disobedience is the method of the Zeitgeist movement when things materialize. If you think about what would happen if even a small majority, if you will, meaning a pocket, was able to do something that just simply didn't support a particular element of the economic structure or the political structure, you'd be amazed at the reaction that would occur and the ears that would go up if you were able to achieve that. I recently saw an interview with George Carlin, and he read my mind. I'd never seen this interview before, and he was in a debate with a talk show host about war and the military, and the talk show host goes, "Yeah, but these kids are railroaded into this institution, they don't know any better, they're just kids." And Carlin goes, "I have no sympathy for any of these people in the military because it's their decision in the end. They should know better," which is a little harsh, but his point is, he says the solution is don't go. If no one goes, they're not going to prosecute everybody. They're not going to shoot everybody in some country that might do that. So that is the mentality. If everyone stood up en masse and just decided not to participate in whatever the field or application may be, it's over. It's completely over.
So let's talk about the resources for a minute. We brought this up, I think, the last town hall meeting, and I think what you said is that once enough people are suffering, there's enough starvation and that sort of thing, that those who are in possession of at least the wealth that supposedly owns the resources will have an emotional response eventually, and that their authentic nature of love will win over in the end.
Well, let's say it this way. You don't see pharaohs anymore, do you? You don't see kings anymore. You see this, we have seen change.
We have in all of our
we have seen
families we're talking about.
We've seen these types of social changes emerge. It's just a matter of a step-by-step process and understanding where it needs to go. And those that are at the top, those that have the massive positions of power and wealth, they won't have any other option. And I'm not saying that there's some kind of violent revolt. Imagine if you were that one individual and you had everyone around you refusing to support your industry, what made you your millions, refusing to come into your occupation that you generate, refusing to even participate. I think you'd turn and change very, very rapidly.
I don't even think it would be necessarily a sympathetic change. I think it would just be a disorientation, having the power structure dissolved beneath them, not knowing what to do, needing a direction.
So it's chaos. Bring on chaos.
It's very strategic. Civil disobedience, as has worked through the American Civil Rights Movement in pockets, as has worked in many civil rights movements across the world. If you stop supporting the system that's oppressing you, the system can't hold up any longer.
Thank you. Another question. I can bring the mic over. Come on up. Come on. Come on down. Slow it down.
you last time, and two questions. For Peter, there was a gentleman who was for direct democracy, and you kind of dismissed it because you said that people are not that smart to be able to vote, like, and know what's going on. And
Not exactly, but I'll let you continue.
well, that's what I understood. And so I find it a little bit contradictory because at the same time you expect people to go to your website and read all this great scientific knowledge and technology that obviously explains the movement and the resources. And
Well, it's not, okay, let me just quickly, just because that sounds really horrible in abstraction. Let me just state that it's not that people are not smart. It means most people are not aware of what's happening in the world and what's behind the institutions that they support, where they came from. People have a brutal amnesia of history in the current culture today. They really they're not paying attention. So when you give democracy as it's traditionally defined is 30 white men hanging a black man. That's democracy. It means that if the majority of people are uneducated and they don't know and they have distorted values that are unsustainable, they can make some very serious problematic decisions. So it's more complicated. There has to be a benchmark to place all reference of thought. In other words, in a newsletter that was written, I used the scientific method as the constitution of human society. The Constitution was written because it knew that straight democracy wouldn't fly. They had to have set rules. They knew that they couldn't just allow a free-for-all or just mob rule. That can't work that way. So the republic attribute, meaning you have set rules, you have these credences that are very difficult to change over time, was to protect this mob rule mentality. That's what the scientific method really is, the scientific sense of causality. When people begin to realize the power of this tool and how it will teach us what the proper motivations are, eventually in the future, when government emerges using artificial intelligence, such as you studied the work of Ray Kurzweil, a lot of other individuals that are talking about this now, we will have a data set that we can work with that will know more than we, in the sense that it will feed back to us. We know we won't make the same mistakes over and over again when it comes to technical operation. So the new interaction will be with a data set and a methodology that's empirical, as opposed to the voting whims of singular individuals that might not know what's right because they're not actually referencing anything. The idea of one person, one vote is a very dangerous concept in the value culture that we have now.
Okay, that's great. Actually, what I really wanted to ask is, I happen to be an environmental scientist, and I've been promoting, like sustainable development. There's climate change. That's actually my work. And so in the last 15 years, that's exactly what I've been trying to do, convince people, we have a serious problem. We'll run out of resources. This type of lifestyle that, is based on this consumption is just not sustainable. And people don't seem to care. They are like, I don't care, I don't believe it. And I said, it's not a matter of belief. I can show you the data, I have facts, and I don't want to see it. So, I mean, again, I'm, of course, 100%, behind the movement, but I just sort of not sure myself, like, how to convince people about that this is really necessary to do. They just don't seem to care. They just don't seem to be rational. They're not going to read all these facts and say, oh yeah, you're right, yeah, I believe it now,
I'll let other people answer this, but I just want to make one comment. Do this, go home and turn on the television. And sit
I don't
there.
have TV, but okay.
Good for you. Well, imagine most people going home after their hideous, dumb, arbitrary job in advertising, or as a secretary, or working at the DMV, or something just completely oblivious and nonsensical and a waste of human life. Imagine them going home and staring at the television. I wanted to do a short film where it's a person, a wage slave, staring at television, and as they're watching TV with the advertisements and all the stuff that you always see, the same cycle, suddenly their entire house catches on fire, but they don't see it. Suddenly nuclear war happens, but they don't see it. And they're watching some reality show the entire time, so you can see the culture is so placated by the conditioning platforms that have been set up.
No, absolutely.
They don't know any better.
Absolutely.
But it doesn't mean they can't learn. But I believe me, the apathy it's enough to make you, it drives you crazy.
Well, that's why I always thought that the solution would be, to basically set up a campaign that would just, on TV, would be showing about like our movement and just keep hammering it into people's heads. But that's like billions of dollars. But yeah.
This is the job of communication. Yeah, this is the task that's in front of us. Communication. Just keep working away at it. You'll get better at it. Find common values, and we're a communicative movement.
That's all it's about. The tipping point will occur eventually.
Any other comments on Townhall? No? Next question.
Yes, hello. I've been a fan for a long time. I've watched all 3 movies. And I just want to speak to about the fear in society, because I notice that people are controlled a great deal by fear. And I notice that societally that's sort of used a great deal. And even in the zeitgeist movement, I think there needs to be more maybe scientific evidence of fear and how it impacts people in a negative sense, which can then show them, oh wow, if I limit my fear. I'm an advanced hypnotherapist, and I don't practice currently, but I'm well aware of conditioning your mind and holding certain stratosphere of consciousness that holds true to what you truly believe. And sum total of what we speak, think, and act, becomes our reality. So my question is, what do you see for the future of the zeitgeist movement to maybe potentially help the tipping point of the paradigm shift of reducing fear and pushing people more in the direction of like faith and hope, so that the sustainability we're all talking about can actually come true? Because I feel that when people have hope and we have faith and we start stepping forward and we start working together and coming forth in new ways, then when there's hope again. That's what I want to ask.
Well, I know you directed this towards me, but I want to make sure everybody has a chance to answer these things, because people always ask me questions directly, and I always feel like I'm being greedy. But I'll just very quickly say, the reason I ended, Zeitgeist 1 was that huge artistic thing. It ended with it's a choice between fear and love, because it was built on that. And what the Zeitgeist movement represents is to show the possibility, not only explain the problems, but to show the possibility. I think when people see the hope of what's possible, which is amazing, they will just slam through the fear. They won't care about what's happening, and that's my hope. They won't care about the imposition of being called names, or they believe it, and they see it, and they say, huh, there it is, let's go do it. And then that would be that. So anybody else like to add, though? But I agree with you explicitly.
Well, I'd like to add that I think that we naturally have fear within us that serves a purpose, and sometimes there are things that might be what makes a person take notice, unfortunately. But the important part of our movement is to have that piece of solution to take the person from that point immediately into a place of direction toward solution. And that's the difference. I think it's irresponsible if someone is creating fear for manipulation purposes, or just fear and has no answers, and they're not being helpful in that sense. But when we're talking about environmental resources and our survival, it is scary, and it's scary for a reason. And I think that's just something to say, look, we need to take notice of that, but also you can't leave someone in that without providing them with the direction of, and here's what we can do about it. Are you interested in this? Can you help us with this? So that immediately takes them, it could be the thing that gets their attention. But I'm not totally against that element of fear, because it's a natural part of us for a reason. But I understand what you're saying as far as it is used a lot in other circles as a manipulative tool. I think the difference with the kind of things we're talking about is that it's not for manipulation, it's just for our survival. And we do have a solution that we're proposing. So.
And also, when you cut down to the very bottom level with a lot of the work that we do and a lot of information that we present, when you cut down to the very bottom of things, it really takes away a lot of the inhibitions and the fears and confusion on the behaviors that people go through, and just the limitations. So I think with a lot of the work that we do, it kind of it gives you more understanding. It's an educational thing that can cut through like the fear and then give you hope. Gotta have hope. Gotta look forward to things.
I'm curious in the audience, like how many people feel like this movement is appealing because it gives you hope? So a lot of hands are raised. So I think that that, yeah, this is something where people are interested in the zeitgeist movement because that's that connection that does give them hope. So I think the more that we communicate our message, the more that we can cultivate that and generate some action toward making it happen.
But also, as far as I know, the Zeitgeist Movement, the Venus Project, these are the only institutions doing anything to attempt to create a resolution. I mean, that's it. There's no other organization, Greenpeace, any activist group, all they do is fight the problems. And on another level, as an aside, fear is a huge market. Fear sells. Remember after 9/11? That big, stupid, orange, red alert thing they had on the screen, 24/7, like the bomb's gonna hit your house. You better watch this. Make sure you're watching CNN 24/7. You can watch that little orange and green bomb. The advertising sponsorship and the wealth of those networks after that was skyrocketed because of everyone's insane fear. And of course, it's also manipulated by many different individuals. Look at people like Alex Jones. These are fear-mongering mentalities. They support themselves by this kind of stuff. Sorry for the name drop, but it just came out.
Well, and you've heard the two acronyms for fear. The fear he's talking about, manipulation, is false evidence appearing real. And then the other fear acronym that Jen was talking about, like your instinctual fear, I won't use the swear word, but instead of that I'll say screw. It's F, everything and run. So for that version, it's your instincts trying to protect you, screw everything and run, but the other word. And then the other is just false evidence appearing real, that people are trying to use through manipulation to make you fearful, but there isn't. It's false.
Thank you for the question. Yes?
Hi, I just have a question. I was thinking we're trying to inform all the adults. Is there anything designed for kids? Because, my daughter's 11, and if she could learn this now, by the time she hits adulthood, it's just, her lifestyle is going to be different. So is there anything designed or anything put together for kids?
Well, actually, there's an individual that did his doctoral thesis in the Zeitgeist Movement in the UK. His name is James Phillips, and I think it's his name, right? He did a radio show of us, a global radio show a while ago. He works explicitly with kids. I suggest it's TZM Education. Type in TZM Education. I believe the website's simply tzmeducation.org. And his interest explicitly is just that, is to target kids and create programs to get these types of values there. And what he found with his work, which I thought was amazing, is that the kids picked it up like that. It made so much sense to them, so I completely identify with that interest.
There was also someone in Illinois who did a series of animated videos that could be appealing to kids that take the different areas that we talk about in the movement and highlight them. And I believe he calls this series the Dr. Now Show. But that's something that anyone could create who is within the movement. If kids are something that you're, specialty of yours, you're great with communicating to kids, maybe that's something where you could contribute to the movement by creating something and allowing it to be available to others to use.
Well, that's an idea.
Yeah, well.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi.
Hi. I was one of those kids who was deeply influenced by you guys, by the way. Great job. Anyways, my question is in regards to hemp technology. I know there's Jack Herrera's book, The Emperor Wears No Clothes, and it's a very simple equation. Hemp equals abundance, abundance equals no profit, illegalize it. And I was wondering what you guys thought about using hemp for maybe hempcrete or for fibers and different other ways to pretty much stop scarcity with it.
It's a no-brainer. Obviously, such a material has been oppressed for many different reasons. And there's tremendous resources. If you go back and look at how it was used long before the oppressive stage emerged, it was used everywhere. It was used for all sorts of things, from energy to materials to medicinal purposes. They had tremendous. There's people I know that are using certain extracts to help with cancer treatments. It's endless. So obviously, there was no opposition to any material that's beneficial.
I was also wondering if maybe you could put a specific little 5-10 minute segment in a movie or something one day just to inform people about it, because it's one of those things that really instantly lets people know, like, oh, the technology's right there, it exists. It's just one more thing to add on to the mountain of evidence.
Sure. I'll see what I can do.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Hi, hello. To have you guys answer this question for me is really, really great for me because it's been on my mind a lot. Peter, you talked about the tipping point based on informing people earlier. In my mind, there's always been a question of, I wrote this down, historically, how bad do things have to get in terms of the disparity between the have and the have-nots until the masses are prepared for a revolution? This is based a little bit different than informing people, more on hardships. So if you could answer that, and thanks a lot, you guys.
I think we addressed that a little bit. The biosocial pressures emerge, the problems, and it forces people to gain awareness of the world around them, hopefully leaning towards a solution, such as what we're talking about, rather than just getting angry. But anger is going to be a part of it. And we've already seen these tipping points occur in pockets, obviously, with social instability. You've seen in London and Madrid and many different areas that are basically cycling right now. They're not stopping. Israel, I mean, these things are, the West just continues to sort of, they throw it out there occasionally in between commercial breaks. They don't actually bring it up to show what's actually happening. The United States, a little bit different value system. It's take quite a bit to smack this country around to, I mean, there'll be a lot of suffering and people walking in circles before this culture actually snaps out of it and begins to be proactive. But I couldn't give you a direct sense. I would say look historically at the revolutions that have occurred, not to say that I agree with the approaches of any revolution that's occurred prior, because they're usually violent. But if you look at what's happened, what economic causes have generated those behaviors, and you can begin to create your own model. So if I was to analyze that, which I actually haven't, I would just go back and look at all the major revolutions that have occurred for the past 1,000 years that are documented, and I would begin to extrapolate data and think about what the causal mechanisms really are. Usually it's employment and access to food and water. So once those things become, which all three of those are in question right now in certain areas.
And that data could become predictive of the future.
It could. Exactly, at least to a statistical threshold, absolutely. Yeah, so I would recommend doing that. But I think we're going to have a very interesting time over the next decade for sure.
One last second. And just,
Okay. And just that, I mean, in the sense of the preaching to the choir type of mentality, I mean, I think we're all in agreement with everything you say. Does that make us, almost in a sense, ambassadors to take the message, you know?
Everyone
to go out. I mean, that's what I kind of feel.
See, there's no authority here. If people
tell others.
If people don't understand it, we have no hope. See, a lot of people seem to think, oh, well, let's just put someone like Peter or Jacques or Jason or Jen in positions of power, and then everything will be fine. No, that's not the way the world needs to work. People need to understand the reference in the world they live in. It's not rocket science to understand the nature of what we're doing and why and what efficiency means. You don't need a PhD mathematician genius and an IQ of 200 to understand this. So I cannot encourage people more to be the ambassador, obviously, or the Gandhi quote, be the change you want to see in the world. That certainly applies. It has to apply.
I just wanted to add, as the U.S. coordinator, I have a lot of other coordinators that come to me and they're timid. They say, well, I'm not really Peter Joseph or Jacques Fresco or other people I've heard speak. And all I can say to them is, no, but you can speak to people that you know in a way that Peter and Jacques wouldn't be able to reach them. You know their language, you know the things they care about, you know their culture. So start with what you're good at and the people within your circles. And that's what we need everyone to do to reach everyone.
Great.
How's everybody doing tonight? I actually am an ambassador of America. I'm a doctor of judicial science and an inquisitor of life. And basically I've done away with my fear by educating myself on how to exercise my rights and be free. And so really when I say I'm an ambassador of America, because I'm a sovereign citizen under the Title IV Free Flag of Peace, which is the flag of the USA, red, white, and blue only. The same flag that our forefathers have died for. Don't get me wrong, I mean, I've been held in contempt of court and kidnapped. I believe that everything is a perspective. Most people call it arrest and bail. No, I call it kidnap and ransom, because that's exactly what it is.
Well, I think we all know that the legal system is a creative contrivance. It's a manifestation of a long period of human evolution with a high propensity for retribution. All laws, and I might disagree with you slightly, basically assume no causality, at least in practice. They can be used in parts of defense, but the problem with laws that we describe is that they really serve as patches. They are basically actions to stop propensities within the system that shouldn't be there to begin with if the system was designed correctly. Now, that's not to say some type of system could exist where there's just no laws, but we could get to a point where there's very few laws because the types of aberrant behaviors don't have a need to manifest. And that's very much within the capacity of the human brain and our ability to adapt to behavior. As far as what you're talking about with the free man and the sovereign citizen, which I believe you mentioned earlier, I think there's a lot of interesting stuff with that, and I don't dismiss it. And I think the legal system might be an avenue to begin to instill certain levels of change to help this transition that we're all trying to push forward with. I'm not quite sure how that would materialize. I think that's for a larger conversation. But I would just want to comment that the legal system really, you got to remember what it's actually doing and not get too hung up on it as a means and a process, because it's based on a certain set of assumptions that, as far as I'm concerned, are actually irrelevant. Because it's based on human behavior elements that are, instead of going to the causal recognition and actually solving problems, we look to these patches of laws. And with that very simple acknowledgement that the legal system doesn't hold empirical water. You can't force people to really do anything in a society that's supposed to be free. The freedom is derived from the actual recognition of what's right and what's responsible, meaning what it means for society to actually exist. Within that constraint is the freedom, if that makes any sense. I can't just walk up on this wall and walk on the ceiling. The law of gravity restricts that. The only laws I'm willing to personally recognize empirically are the natural laws, the laws that govern how many calories I have to take in, what types of toxins I can't get close to my system because they'll pollute me or give me cancer. These are the real laws on the subject of laws. But you've gone on a big tangent, and I don't want to go too far with it, but I agree that in transition, the type of approach that you talk about, and I compliment you on your work for engaging the system, but in transition, I think it can work, but the legal system eventually, in our mind, will be phased out because it's not a legitimate system. It's a false system based on a huge level of inefficiency within the design of the socioeconomic structure. I'll be happy to talk with you briefly afterwards, but we do need to move on because we're going to run out of time. I'm sorry.
Can I close out with one more?
You have 1 minute. You have 1 minute.
Yes. See, the country that we live in, well, we don't live in the United States. The country is run by a.
The United States doesn't exist. The United States isn't real.
Sure.
No, it's not. It's a fictitious creation by a bunch of white people that got together a long time ago that stole a bunch of land from other people. And they created this fucking environment, they called it freedom when they had slaves. And the whole thing is one big concoction. There's no legitimacy, basis, integrity in the entire thing. It's an assumption that we've made that these things exist.
Yeah.
There's only one world, there's only one species, there's only one set of natural laws, there's only one way to really view things if you step back far enough to see the empirical referent that we want to establish.
And what you're referencing is admiralty law. It's a
No, it's not.
It's natural law.
It's not. Listen here, I understand where you're coming from, but it isn't admiralty law. It isn't any law system that's been established by man. Man can't create laws. Laws are already here before we. They were here billions of years ago before we even existed. Thank you, though.
When I kind of got into the Zeitgeist movement and started to discover it, what really kind of impressed itself upon me is the fact that when you look at the Zeitgeist movement and the movies, it talks very about global systems and at the very least national systems. My question is, what kind of thought and what kind of focus of thought should be put to like legalizing yourself as a human being, escaping this current global system? And for me, that's really interesting because once you're free of this global system that we all operate under, and this monetary system we all operate under, once you can provide for yourself and your well-being, it's your whole life is then voluntary. You have this rise of voluntarism, and what you can do, you can really, help reach critical mass at a faster pace. The more free time you have to, invest in the.
Talking about living off the land as an individual?
Yeah, ideas like that, yeah.
Well, I just wanted to say that you wouldn't want to. Being free in the sense I think you're talking about is maybe a good thing for you personally, but I think a certain amount of working within the system to affect change is important too. And even if you are able to escape in some kind of way, living off the land or being legally free, as we just kind of went over, you're still not going to be free as long as there's endless war. You're still not going to be as free if there's still bums on the street with no hands, literally nubs, no hands. I mean, the world is not being taken care of. We have to work within it, as tortuous as it is, to affect change. Is that kind of what you were?
Well, the idea that I was trying to get at was that if you can kind of remove yourself, you can help reach this global critical mass. I think there's a lack of focus maybe on the individual and individually moving at a pace that the human life works at, as opposed to the global organism and the human biomass.
Personal ascension versus
Well, okay, I can see in a sense what you're talking about, but in the end, it's a social resolution. It's not going to come from one individual's say that can maybe live off the land or develop some type of personal sovereignty. It might assist in some way, but to me that's a little arbitrary. No.
I think it would be difficult without cooperation from your environment to live. I mean, the food you eat is not exclusively all that what you alone produce, I'm assuming, or the energy that you are getting is. I mean, I feel like it sort of takes a community for an individual to thrive.
Yeah, I mean, there's a global local continuum and all, and that, and thank you.
But what I can say to you for that is, as far as the individual goes, well, that's one of the things that I like about the idea of a resource-based economy and the design of it, and freeing people up, automating jobs that people no longer want to do. And if you think about profit motive not be the driving force to what gets produced, to me that's a cultural renaissance like no other that I would love to be in. And whatever your individual pursuit would be, you would then be free to make that contribution. So to me it would be, if we work toward achieving a global resource-based economy, that would be the ultimate for both, a great equilibrium between the individual and the collective. It's a good balance.
Yeah, I think the reason I kind of like to think about that personal kind of sphere.
Microphone, so he can be heard.
I don't know. The reason for me that it seems at least not to devote any of my attention and my energy towards this personal kind of sphere is because, I mean, essentially what a resource-based economy is on a global scale is a force against all that exists and all of history in terms of landed powers. I mean, every level is a wall. Every power that is against a movement like this. And so for me, using the technology that exists to, get beyond, reach something else, it's kind of a...
And yet every individual would benefit from it, including powers. So
it's one of those artistic ideas that you talked about shying away from, kind of living that blending of the life and art and kind of all that whole sphere of nonsense.
Well, I would just comment that no one can live to themselves anymore. Even the great wealthy individuals with all their bodyguards are not going to be able to do much when everyone else is struggling. They don't have clean air, clean water, and food. When nuclear warheads are still being manufactured that could create radiation poisoning, no matter how big their mansion is. There's a global threat emerging that's being born out of this system that threatens basically everybody. It's been there since the Cold War. It's getting more and more complicated as problems arise. And what I think's on the horizon now is the threat of levels of war that have never existed before because of the resource problems that are beginning to emerge. All the wars in the past have always been kind of just territorial wars, like they've always been. God, I mean, look back in history. It's just look at the map of wars and territories. It's just one massive fight over the course. It's like you just hit the fast forward button. It's like, and everyone's stealing land from everybody else. But now it's a little bit different because we have true global environmental problems that are going to threaten everybody, at least for the majority. And that's going to change a lot of minds out there, even the rich, wealthy people.
Yeah, no, I totally recognize that, and I agree, but you know, to a certain extent for me, history is really the story of governments doing really horrible things to masses of people. And so I think that the kind of current global world system is, you know, that same line. I think the economic and the environmental problems that we're facing are still of that same train. So, you know, I don't know. It's all things.
We have our work cut
conversation.
out.
Yeah.
And you have your work cut out. Thank you.
Hi, my question is if the Zeitgeist movement had any plans to kind of infiltrate our current political system and then from that way. I mean, I don't know if that's completely taboo, but I want to know how you plan on reaching those far corners of the world that don't, you know, I don't know.
It was the word infiltrate. Like we're supposed to get in and spy on them, take it over somehow.
We put on our little American flag buttons. And
With the cameras.
No, but do you mean like influence or get this information to them where they're interested in it?
Well,
By
I think
infiltrate?
infiltrate.
Or use a strategy that's political.
Yeah, well, I mean, I say infiltrate just because, I don't know, this view is so polar opposite from what our government is doing, basically. And I don't know necessarily running for office, but reaching out towards like-minded political figures.
Well, I know a lot of people have sent materials that we've produced to many politicians in Congress, and there's been some personal feedback from different individuals that I've had. You'd be amazed how open-minded some of these individuals out there are. They won't admit it, but they do expose themselves to a lot of things that you would never expect them to expose themselves to. And if you pay attention to their rhetoric, it slowly inches in with a few of them. But I know there was one individual that claimed to be running for something under the tenets of the Zeitgeist movement. I'm afraid to endorse anything like that because I think it could be abused as like some money-raising thing. Because all political figures need money initially to do anything. But ultimately, since we're really not interested in the political structure and overcoming it, I think the best thing we can do is simply to put pressure on that system. Everyone is mad at their political systems across the world. If you find one government out there that actually likes their political leaders, likes what their politicians are doing, whether they even understand it or not, just because of all the economic problems that are emerging, I mean, the biggest talking point in the election coming up in 2012 is, the job creation, which presidential candidate, as though any of them have any education with respect to how an economy actually works and where the source of these problems come from.
So do you see it as a possibility to break down the government from the inside?
I see an inevitability of certain figures within government stepping up and calling out true causality. Whether they create this type of solution, we'll have to wait and see. But I think there are many people out there that really do understand the problems of the market system. They do understand what we're doing. They attempt at legislation to collar as much as possible, but it always gets overturned because of the money. The money power really is the government. It has to be. But it's a big topic. I could say maybe in the future something like that could emerge, but it would have to be very, very carefully crafted. So I'd love to see somebody with a lot of money, say a billionaire, come forward and say, an eclectic billionaire, as they would say, who believes in this movement and chooses to run for office under such a tenet. That would be amazing. That's probably the best we can hope for in that context as of right now. Thank you.
Hello. I have a question on how you guys would go about spreading awareness to the people who migrated into this system, because to them it's as good as it gets, and where they come from.
Well, I know with Zeitgeist Moving Forward, when Zeitgeist Moving Forward came out in January, we had screenings all over the world, even in a refugee camp in Palestine. And so it's getting everywhere. And then as far as people here in California, I think it'd be great if like a Spanish chapter emerged, where the Spanish population could be addressed.
And it's moving from greater exploitation to exploitation that doesn't hurt quite as bad. You're still being exploited. The conditions that take advantage of you, that require you to have to trade your labor for income. They probably still don't have health insurance here. People who come here and they work under the table still don't have access to a lot of the social systems. So is it better? Yeah, sure. It's better than you eat a little bit more. But the thing is that you're still not getting taken care of in the long run. And the environmental factors of an overconsumption model that we live in, it's like, okay, so I make a few more bucks this week, but the amount of brake fluid and antifreeze that's leaking into the groundwater where I live is going to affect everybody sooner or later. Or I'm just making that example up right now, but the point is that the outcomes of the system that we live in will affect everyone across the scale. It's like, people have to walk away from half of, I don't know, half the region of Japan that was still radioactive, and we still, the sea life in the ocean where that gets into, we've dumped copious amounts of toxic waste into the ocean in barrels, just dropped it at the bottom of the ocean. It's going to take, 500 years for it to surface somewhere. And I don't want to be there when it happens, it's because it's going to affect everybody. So the system is having outcomes. You may be able to reach people from that point of view. If you don't have clean air, if you don't have good food, proper nutrition, earning a little bit more money for a short-term view is no long-term sustainable outlook.
And I'd also add that the reason there's such immigration to the United States and has been historically, at least in the sense of the surrounding regions, so-called illegal immigration and that stuff, that's because what John Perkins calls the corporatocracy, which is this Western power, massive market, that's what we're looking for. Basically, the dynamics of what comprises the market system and the values that surround it have created this corporate structure that meshes with government that works to exploit all surrounding regions. It's imperialism, colonialism, we've known that for a long time, masked under globalization. So what we have are people migrating to the country that's basically the source of their oppression in their own country, that's destroyed their jobs, that's destroyed their resources.
And then being exploited with the fear of deportation.
Sure.
That's a threat. Who are you going to tell if you're being abused in the workplace?
Well, simultaneously, it's also kind of an illusion, too, because the immigrants are also exploited financially here, given terrible wages, they're even given high-interest credit cards, even though they're illegal. So it's that sickness of market profiteering and cost efficiency that says, okay, we just exploited this country, we've taken their resources, they don't have anything, so let's put a sweatshop slavery sweatshop in there so we don't have to pay them anything. Oh, we got a bunch of people migrating here that need money, and we can pay them nothing and give them credit cards, charge them tons of interest. And see how the cycle just works. So it's not really, there's no betterment here in the U.S. We just happen to be the empire of the period. And we seem to have that type of luxury. We're simultaneously the source of all the problems.
Well, we know that, and then
Sure.
to them it's like, what they see is just, it's totally different. I can understand as to why they would want it.
In a temporal sense, people are desperate and they'll do whatever they can to survive, and that's just unfortunate. That's why the cycle's so nasty, is it keeps going because of these types of pressures, because of the survival mechanisms, and it keeps reinforcing the exploitation, basically. It keeps reinforcing the profiting off of that exploitation, because no one will stand up and just say no, because they can't.
Exactly.
And that's what's so problematic. I understand.
Yeah. Thank you.
I hate our system, and I was just wondering if it would be a solution for, let's say, everyone stop paying taxes and stop using money. Because really money is just a belief, the money is a belief system. It's man-made, it's not real. And I'm realizing that more and more, but what do you think would happen if we got enough people to stop? Nobody likes paying taxes, right? And if money didn't exist and we weren't using it, what could the government do?
Well, it's easier said than done. Obviously, the government can crack down on the other alternative currency, but there's only one avenue I've seen that seems to be tolerated, though I'm not sure how legal it really is. That's called a time bank, and it's this process of barter through services. There's one in New York. I had a friend that worked with it, and basically people go on, they through a fairly advanced platform that values certain forms of labor, they swap different services. So someone will come in and mow your lawn in exchange for you to fix a part of their car.
Yeah, what my thing is, I've thought this through, and to me it's like we would start taking care of each other. We would start caring about one another as human beings, just naturally.
Well, sure.
If the government just collapsed, it would just be like, oh, hey, hi, I can see you.
I think so, yeah.
I can see you. We can see each other. So, I mean, I look forward to that. I'm just like, I mean, I just found Zeitgeist recently, and I'm just
I think
like,
the key is critical mass is necessary for that to be effective. So that's, we're really
I
going
know.
for something, yeah.
yeah, like somehow, you know how like there's a lot of trends. I think that money is no longer the trend. I think that's a good idea. So.
Well, the monetary system's on its way out because it can't support itself because the foundation of it is labor, and labor is not going to persist for the majority of the human population over time. It's going to be phased through technological unemployment and other problems that will couple in with that in this sort of self-feeding system of degradation. And then inevitably, people will begin to do things like time banks or start smaller communities.
Can't we just like Twitter it or something?
I wish it could happen that rapidly, but I think...
Our job would be so easy if we had that power
Yeah.
right now. I mean,
We might, and we might not realize it.
we try. It's always being attempted. I mean,
Every day I would imagine there's a Twitter going out somewhere going.
Yes.
It's going on all the time. There's so many people talking.
I thought it was my idea.
how'd you get here?
No, I mean, I've never seen those orders anywhere.
Oh.
New project. I'll talk to you after.
Really for Peter, do you have a timeline sort of in your head as to when you see some of these changes occurring?
Well, I mean, people ask me that all the time, and unfortunately I have to say no. But I do know if you track statistically what's happening, what's on the horizon, the fact that the S&P has predicted that in about 15, 20 years, 60% of the countries will be technically bankrupt. And I think it's going to happen much faster than that, frankly. The fact that you have these admissions of all these problems, from depletion of arable land to increases in poverty, cancer, mental health problems, there's a huge system and tornado of things that are occurring that are going to do something. They're going to do something. The question is, will people be smart enough to know what to ask for and what to demand and what to put themselves into a position to enable? Or will they just rebel, get violent, and have the same cycle of temper tantrums and stuff that we're beginning to see already? I think the next, I just say the next 10 years are going to be very, very interesting. And I think that the more we get the movement out, and or whatever we call anything, it's not even about this movement or whatever institution that identifies with this by whatever name, as long as they connect together and are prepared to step up at some point in unison, things could happen very, very rapidly if that is the case. I think global critical mass, as the woman pointed out just a moment ago, if 50% of the U.S. taxpayers decide not to pay, the U.S. government wouldn't prosecute anybody. People forget how powerful the masses can be if we could just share some similar values. If we could just get that baseline out of the way and stop the infighting of ideologies and religious hatreds and finding that common ground, it could happen extremely rapidly if that was the case, but there's so many hurdles. The growth of the Islamic tradition, while I think Islam is a great religion on one side, it also has very serious problems on the other side. This growth of this religion is massive and continuing and expanding exponentially. This is a barrier to people wanting to work together on some level. I don't oppose religions in general, but if we have any ideology out there that says, we're going to stay in our clique, we don't want this, no one can interfere with this, that's not going to fly over time. Eventually something's going to have to give with any ideology that thinks that way.
And just one follow-up. Do you anticipate there being any sort of pre-existing institutions, governments, what have you, things that are already in place, worldwide or within the United States, that would be drawn to this or be interested in working with this movement?
I think it's just a matter of time before certain governments that have been so battered, that are probably smaller than the dominant ones, come forward and try to begin to implement certain aspects of it. I wouldn't be surprised if Iceland attempted to do similar types of things eventually, given how their economy is doing, which is modest. But they were the first to be hit, if you remember. It's funny, I was on a plane and I was watching this documentary on Iceland about 1 week after that major just bottom falling out and total chaos and poverty in Iceland. And the plane video was a documentary on Iceland's progress because of all their wonderful central bank policies. It was the most hilarious thing I'd ever seen. All these pundits and PhDs, well, it was only when Iceland expanded its economy and got the growth period right, and blah, blah, blah. And then suddenly, obviously, it all fell out because it's all a big false system anyway. These things will continue to happen. And I think, frankly, South America, Latin America will be the first probably to catch on now. because they have many resources down there. They're working to break away from the corporatocracy. They have been for so long. The big revolutions that are not talked about in the United States at all have been occurring in these areas. And I think whether it's done by a leader or the people, I think we're going to see staples of such efficiency. Hopefully a sustainable city will be brought out eventually. These are stepping stones, but I really wish I could tell you more in specifics.
I'd personally like to see Google get behind this agenda. I think they could give us a leg up on the database, and they already have like the driverless cars and the satellites, and I think we could get a lot accomplished with just that. Them on our side.
And all, though we do track timelines and a lot of data and collapse and all that, we don't really, that's not really the whole point is that it's the right thing to do. Whether we move into a circular city at some point, whether we ever do create critical mass is aside the point. We do it because we're in this movement because it's the right thing to do. Because we see the solutions. It's all these things that have been talked about in the movement and tonight are not really unique to anybody, but they're common to everybody. That's how we do it. All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Go ahead.
Sure.
Hi. Okay, so I was wondering if the Zeitgeist movement, or you guys, or whoever's kind of like in charge of spreading the idea, what any projects were to reach out to like low-income neighborhoods around America, and even I guess they're both countries too. But yeah.
I think there's a traveling screening project actually.
Yeah, there is. I guess you could call it an urban traveling screening project. The cameraman's kind of initiated this awareness project where he's going to take these screenings out using his car and rigging up some kind of screening to project it onto big blank walls. So there's that, and then also we have we're doing a lot of community center events. We're going to be tabling at Lemon Grove Park in Hollywood in a few days actually, and then we're also going to be at some more community centers to try and address gang reduction. These community centers are based around gang reduction and youth coming in to play basketball and get off the streets and just coming to be productive. So this is exactly where the movement comes in.
I know chapters that have had screenings in libraries and have invited their homeless community to attend. So I mean, there are always projects that you can start like that.
Well, also with the Zeitgeist Media Festival, it's we're tying it in with the LA Food Bank, and everyone's bringing a can of food. So we're going to be giving over 2,000 pounds to over 1,000 different homeless shelters and boys and girls clubs, inner city. So that's another way, and that's global too. We have over 30, probably up to 50 parallel events around the world of the Zeitgeist Media Festival, and all of them are going to be global, food drives. So it's another way to help the community directly.
That's cool, because I was just like noticing how most people in this room I don't think they come from poverty, and like it was just like an interesting thing to notice.
I think that demographic is really has the potential for the most force, but often what goes with that type of poverty is a lack of education. I often comment that a lot of people that oppose these ideas happen to be wealthy, and that tends to be true. But I've also run into some very impoverished people that have deep-seated biases, and they just, whenever they hear something like this, because they haven't been benefited by a really decent education and critical thought, they just say, "Oh, you're just a communist," and they're fast to throw out very, very ignorant remarks, unfortunately. But I would love, actually, I haven't talked to anybody about this, but to start to move the Los Angeles Town Hall to different lower-income regions, such as South Central Los Angeles. Try to engage those that probably have the least ears to hear it because of the oppression that they have. But to try and initiate that and try to plant some seeds in those communities, because really, if you really think about the numbers in the poor community, if they were just a fraction of them were able to grasp onto this and to get behind it, it would be incredible what would happen if they were given those resources intellectually.
That's really cool.
Okay, thank you. One more? No more.
Oh, sure, one more. All right, here we
Come
go.
on, there. The last question.
Nice shirt, dude.
Thank you for taking the last question. Wanted to know if Ron Paul getting elected, or being out there, is that going to help the movement? Is he behind the movement? Does he say anything about it?
Very quickly, I support Ron Paul. I'll definitely vote for him because he's the best thing out there with his values. He's also a complete free market. He's completely free market. He doesn't understand. He has a very wonderful disposition on certain things, which I support. You know, removing a lot of the problematic issues with the central bank, a lot of underlying attributes that are established for this system. But he doesn't address the root cause, that's for sure. He's a sovereign individual. He believes in restricting the United States involvement. On one part, that's good. Another part, he wants to maintain the same old mentality of not sharing resources, of being closed off. And again, it's a debate of issue. He wants to end wars. That's great. Central banks, even the fractional reserve lending policy, in certain discussions. I would support all of that. Point being, I would support him to do anything. He's the best we have. But would he support this movement? I strongly doubt it, because in his mind, he would probably take the view that this is the state. And the mentalities like him are against state power, and they believe in the anarchy of the free market. They don't understand its its inefficiency. They don't understand the waste that's produced and all this magnitude of problems that arise from it. I'd love to have a discussion with them, but you do what you can. And I'll just state definitively that I do support him. I hope everyone else will support him, because when it comes to the average of candidates out there, or politicians in general, him and Dennis Kucinich are all we have.
Thank you.
I just wanted to, I know this is the conclusion, right? I just wanted to say that we have the Zeitgeist Media Festival coming up. Just wanted to remind you guys, we have a few cards we can give you guys tonight. Otherwise, definitely just a reminder, take one of those little business cards around the little box right here, and we'll mail you some for like $5 or whatever you can afford. And the Media Festival is going to be really big with artists and a gallery. You really got to come out and see this art that really translates the movement in an art piece. Not like this at all. And there's going to be performers, and the food bank too. Yeah, it's about communicating values through the
It's
artwork.
another great opportunity to bring friends, to introduce them to the material, and that would be in a sense where it's not, it's different than our other events. Like we mentioned before, it's not the heady, intellectual, lots of information that, somebody may not be open to or have the patience for. It's going to be fun. It's going to be celebratory of people who have shared these values. So surely, people you can bring with you.
And help the food bank too. That's a big part of it.
Globally.
And your closing statements.